Hello and welcome to another edition of CryptoKoryo podcast. Today we are changing a bit the theme and we are going to discuss about GameFi. I have here Wei with me from AI Arena. Hey Wei, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How's it going? Nice to meet you and great to be here.
Great having you. Thank you. I'm doing well as well. So GameFi is a big sector in crypto. There is a lot of investments from VCs in crypto, and we've seen what it can do in the bull market and less in 2021. There have been a lot of development since then. I'm eager to explore all of this with you today and then also talk about AI Arena. Let's talk about GameFi specifically to start with. What has been the evolution since the early days of GameFi in crypto, Sandbox, Axie Infinity in the last
Mhm.
3 years?
Yeah, I think certainly a lot has happened in this space over the last 3 years. Late 2022, sorry, late 2021, 2020, that was obviously a very, very strong financing environment for a lot of GameFi projects, especially off of the back of success of games like Axie Infinity. And then obviously the crypto cycle went the other way. What ended up happening was a lot of the initial kind of weaker developers and studios were washed out through the bear market. But there are many very strong teams that were building and well capitalized through the bear market that are now about 2 or 3 years along in their development life cycle. And in this cycle, they're ready to kind of release titles that are, uh, I think to a standard where I think it really can capture the attention of players, not just in Web3 but also Web2. So I think it's going to be very exciting and very different this time around for this cycle. There's actually going to be a lot more products and playable games and impressive playable games relative to 2021, where it was a lot of just storytelling, narrative, raising large rounds off of basically a marketing video with no product behind it. So I think that's something that we can look forward to. I think the one thing to keep in mind, especially when it comes to gaming projects, is that gaming takes an incredible amount of time to produce and develop. So even 3 years is not that long of a time to develop like a double A or triple A game. I think, these mega franchises in Web 2, these are like sometimes they're decade long development processes, etc. So it's an incredible amount of production that goes behind games. So I think from a timeline perspective, the expectations were very inflated in 2021, but I think now in 2024, there's going to be a lot of exciting titles and playable games that will come to market, and people are going to be, I think, surprised by what comes out of this cycle.
I'm really excited about GameFi and because of a few reasons. One is that the infrastructure we had in 2021 was really not where you know uh, couldn't scale big games, etc. And we were already seeing problems with even Axie Infinity and other games that were on Ethereum, with gas fees over $100, and there weren't a lot of alternative solutions. Even more scalable chains like Solana had interruptions, etc. So we have gone we are far away from that. A lot of improvements have happened now. We are seeing like specialized blockchains for GameFi, Ronin network,
Mhm.
immutable, and all these chains that are just focused on gaming and scalability, even say and sui, etc. On the other side, we've had a lot of VC money, from specialized gaming VCs like Animoca, etc., who have spent a lot of money into the development of the infrastructure, etc. And in 21, we saw with Axie and other games this concept of play to earn, and it
Yep.
played out pretty well in the bull market. Where prices were going up, there we were having more and more new users coming, retail, etc. So and then it exploded, right? It went to zero. Everything. Players left, and we saw that with Axie. We saw that then later with Step N, GMT. Um, and then people actually criticized it a lot, this play to earn concept, saying that this is a ponzi, is not sustainable. In terms of this concept, what have we learned from the past bull market? And
Mhm.
can we say play to earn is just a bull market thing, or can we have more sustainable long term, play to earn concepts?
Yeah. Well, let me start by saying let's normalize the comment around play to earn. I don't think play to earn is actually specific to GameFi. It's just token incentives for customer acquisition, and that is deployed in every single crypto vertical, right? And this is a crypto native feature. So in gaming, it was branded play to earn because there was this play aspect to it. I think certainly the experience with projects like Axie and Steppen. I think what ends up happening is a lot of times projects realize that having your own quote unquote currency is a very powerful um, resource in terms of customer acquisition, right? So you start to understand it's basically like subsidized marketing spend, right? You can actually create this asset that you can go out and acquire customers for effectively no cost to basically your balance sheet as a corporate entity. When you start to discover that, it's very intoxicating. It's hard to be disciplined when you start to discover the power of this type of mechanism, which is why I think a lot of times, especially in bull markets, projects throw caution to the wind, right? Because in a bull market, a rising tide lifts all boats. Liquidity is coming into the system. Demand side for tokens is vastly outweighing the supply side. So it masks a lot of the issues that are prevalent in economic design. The challenge with economic design within gaming is even like more it's like more pronounced than perhaps other types of projects because games are very complex like social systems, right? So to have some type of balance within your token economy within a game is non-trivial. It's very hard to design something that's like retains balance over the long term. So I think to your question of like have we learned anything from the last cycle, I think the the strong builders understand that what you need to create is demand for things in the economy where people want to spend money, right? That's really what you're looking for is there this willingness for users to spend money into your system? Because what we know is we can issue value from the system whenever we want in any quantity that we want. That's really what the token side is. That's the supply side. But what we need to focus on is the demand side. Why would people spend? What avenues do they have to spend and how much spending are they going to do in order to restore that balance to your economy, right? Have we learned anything? I think, yeah, there are groups out there that are perhaps paying more attention to this concept of like balancing economies. The challenge is when you're in a bull market, the incentives are distorted, right? And as much as people want to say, oh, we have to be very, very rigorous and disciplined in terms of how we issue value on the supply side, because on the demand side we have X amount coming in. It's very challenging in the bull market because you get into this kind of like relative comparison between you and other projects, and what you have is like in effect you have this system, a broader system where there's competitive currency devaluation, right? Because people are just issuing more and more of their currency as incentive, and to acquire more of the attention share of the market, right? So I'm a little bit skeptical. I think every single cycle people say, "Oh, the mistakes of the last cycle will never be repeated again," and it's like, no, that's not true. It's just cycles. This is human behavior at play as the cycle materializes. There are natural features of how economies are established that steers the incentive of the behavior of the people who are in that part of the cycle at that moment in time. So I think you're going to see the same thing happen again. So which means that from a project perspective and from a building perspective, you have to be very deliberate in terms of how you create those controls for your system so that you have the ability to still restore that balance if you can manage to do so. It's not easy. And I think in a gaming context, it's even more challenging because these are complex, evolving economies with a lot of different users with all different utility functions. So I don't know. It remains to be seen. I think you're going to see the exact same thing again. And maybe it's going to be branded slightly different. It's not going to be called play to earn. It's going to be something else. But then after, when we go into the next bear market, it's going to be the exact same post-mortem analysis, and people are going to say the same thing. See, I told you so. It's all going to repeat itself.
So can we conclude that by saying that GameFi in crypto is a cyclical, it has a cyclical pattern where in a bull market it performs really well, and no matter what you do in a bear market, the incentives are just not there. We don't have new joiners, and it just collapses, and we can't do anything about it.
That's my belief. I think in aggregate, the arc of crypto or Web3 is it's a secular bull market. So users on a secular basis is going up, but there's incredible swings in the cyclicality on the way up. So I think when you're caught in a cycle, the incentives as it is dictated by the system heavily influences how people behave, right? You can see it right now. Like, for what reason is there this meme coin mania happening, right? Like, there's no fundamentals behind it. We're in the starting stages of a bull market when we have already massive amounts of speculative excess behind memes, right? Like, from a more kind of fundamental discipline perspective, you're looking at it and you're saying, like, why does this happen? Like, as if we haven't learned this lesson multiple times in previous crypto cycles. Of course we have, but it still happens. Why? It's because when you're in that phase of the cycle, the aggregate of the system dictates incentives, and then into the vagaries of how markets behave, right? So this is not a value judgment of saying good, bad. It's how this market structure works. That's my personal view.
Yeah, I think I kind of agree with that. Is you have to play the game, because when you have to capitalize on the opportunity, and there is a special, the window opportunity is not doesn't last forever. And so
Yeah.
that's where you see some games that are go more aggressive with the inflation of the token, but because there is demand, everything goes up and you don't notice. uh,
Yes.
and then everything collapses, and those who are very aggressive, then they collapse more, even more. If we zoom out from crypto, gaming in general is like a 300 billion kind of industry, something like this.
Hmm.
With the incentives that we have in crypto, with tokenization and all these things we discussed, we are in the early days, and we discussed that it takes time to develop AAA games. But do you think it's just a natural thing that GameFi will gain a big part of the market share of the gaming industry in general in the next decade?
I think that's very hard to say. I don't know if I have a strong view of Web3 games and its ability to take market share from Web2 games. I think for one, the definitional boundary between what a Web3 game is and a Web2 game is going to blur into the future, right? It's as if we're saying, like, oh, what is advertising in the modern world, right? Like, previously we could have said, in the beginnings of like these mega tech giants as huge like monopolies or oligopolies on the advertising market, we would say, oh, there's like traditional print ad mediums, and then there's like this online ad market, right? But today it's just like it's like a general term in terms of how we think about advertising and that market for the attention. I think a similar arc in gaming will unfold. The key distinctions line between like Web3 and Web2 is really financialization in games, right? And the fact that it's not that in Web2 games there were never things like markets or marketplaces or the ability to trade assets, etc. But they were all kind of like ring fenced, and they were all kind of like centralized, localized entities. In Web3, it's almost like you now enter a monetary union system, right? Like, now you're into the EU kind of construct where there's free flow of capital, free flow of labor, free flow of users even, and and all different assets are transferable, and you can basically convert from one kind of currency of a system to another very very frictionlessly. So that's the new context. And now we have things like tokens and NFTs, which not only are ways that you can reframe consumer products, but then inherently those consumer products have value because they can be traded on markets, and you allow price discovery to materialize its own kind of market driven value. So I think that's like the feature of Web3 games. I think if you fast forward 10 years, perhaps all games migrate to that system where the underlying infrastructure is natively Web3. And then what you're left with is just yet again game experiences, right? And what, like, it still has to be the game experience that is the differentiation, because the financialization side of things is commoditized. Anyone can do that. And it's really going to be plug and play. So it's hard to answer that question. Like, is GameFi going to take over? I think the underlying technology of blockchain is going to create new ways of monetization that are extremely powerful. And I think ultimately the incumbents are going to adopt that because they're going to see that as this is just 10x, 100x better than what we have currently. And the first thing that I think Web2 players are starting to understand is token as a form of subsidized marketing spend. It is exceedingly powerful, right? Think about any, think about any kind of like startup company. You raise Series A, B, C, 10 million, $100 million rounds. What are you using that capital for? Like 80% of it is going to customer acquisition costs, is marketing, right? It's to get the concept of the brand out there to bring users to the table. So traditionally, you have to raise a bunch of capital to do that. And what you're doing is you're diluting your cap structure. You're diluting your equity to do so. In the new world is no, you can launch your own token. If that token has market value and if there's a community and a sense of belief around what you're building, it has market value, and you can use that as a war chest to acquire users, right? Without any dilution to the equity. Like, that's transformative in terms of like the economic sense of how to build these things. So I think with the Web2 gaming industry, like, they're going to take notice of that over and beyond just okay. There's these assets within games that are tradable. I think players understand that inherently in Web2 games. Again, it just wasn't in an open system. But I think this new avenue of like how to reach audiences, how to captivate them, how to lock them in with primitives such as tokens and the proper designs of that is very, very powerful. And I think I would anticipate everyone will start to incorporate that. It's going to be slow moving at first because there's a healthy level of skepticism on the outsider's view looking in. But ultimately, you're going to have these really, really staggeringly large success stories that make it undeniable for everyone so that they have to fall in line and start to kind of adopt.
Yeah, I think this incentivization through tokens and the marketing that you mentioned is very important because when you're doing, for example, machine learning or general AI, maybe you're doing some B2B services, you don't need that much marketing spend. But gaming, by definition, is a B2C product. Like you're
Yes.
developing games for retail. And then because there is such a competition in gaming, you need to spend a lot of dollars in marketing, and then through
Yes.
tokenization you can do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
That's exactly
l-
it.
let's start to talk about AI Arena, but as an introduction, I looked a bit at your documentation, and so I saw the kind of games that there were there. In 1996, IBM developed the Deep Blue that ultimately won a chess against the world champion at that time, Kasparov. And then later, like many years later, DeepMind's AlphaGo in 2016 bet the world champion in Go, Lee. That was a big event because it was through deep learning models that we were able to achieve that, and the number of
Yep.
combinations Go were so much higher than compared to chess. And then 3 years later, again, Google's DeepMind developed AlphaStar that also beat like the pros of StarCraft,
Yes.
and that was in 2019. So the there are a few questions here. One is the future of gaming AI versus AI? Uh, so I see few possibilities. Either one is AI versus AI, and humans are watching, uh, and maybe actually from what I saw, AI Arena would fit in that category. But like humans develop the models and then they train them, etc. But then ultimately, it's AI versus AI. Another possibility that I see is actually humans using this AI to train themselves, and then we have humans playing against humans. And maybe now, for example, some chess players are using that, to improve their games with the AI to ultimately, become better when they play humans. What do you see as a trend that in the upcoming years?
For sure. I think that's a great question, and it actually speaks to what we're building at the company, which is called Arena X Labs, and our thesis about the future. So, starting at the highest level, which is it inevitable that any game in the future would be effectively dominated by AI? I.e., if you ever pit the best human against the best AI, the AI will win. That's my thesis. Like we are that quickly approaching the point whereby AI is going to be better than humans at most things, games included. So we actually do have a platform that we are creating, and we will launch this year. It's called Psi, and what Psi is think about it as a platform where we will incentivize and bring on board the ability for the best AI researchers to build their own models to compete in different types of games or game like environments. So imagine chess was a game, Go was a game, AI Arena was a game, arcade games. And even in the future, it's abstractions of real world problems framed in a game like environment. And then what we have is a platform that we aggregate the best AI research talent and steer their efforts to solving those problems through competition. That's what Psi is. The outcome of that is a couple of things. Number one is you're going to see the most unbelievable level of gameplay that is well beyond the ability of humans to achieve, but it's going to be exciting to watch that happen because it's the interest of I can't even conceive of how something can do this thing at this level, right? Which is really like if you watch things like the AlphaGo documentary, something that we thought it was innately human or this vector of creativity, like that entire concept collapsed right in front of us when that model was able to kind of like defeat Lee Saito, like I can't remember, like 4 out of 5 times or something in that series, right? So I think Psi is built for that type of context where we can again like aggregate the best minds in AI to compete in these domains. And really over time, what we hope for it to become is we can abstract difficult problems into game like settings. And this is actually the stepping stone that allows us to get to AGI faster. Because one of the key things that is a limitation between where we are and what AGI, our belief of what AGI is actually novel model design. There's way too much focus right now in the AI space on things like large language models and generative models, foundational models, etc. And I think those are all lucrative and very important aspects of research, but there's an over dominance of attention in those particular domains and pockets. And there's a lot of really exciting areas of machine learning that are underexplored. One of which is creating better model architectures, right? Better models can yield better results with less data, less compute, more efficiency, vastly better performance at solving domain specific problems or generalized problems. Psi is something that we're devising to solve that problem. And I think from our perspective, it's going to get us to AGI faster. So that's number one. Number two, coming back to your other question, is like, okay, so then the natural question is like, if everything trends to AI versus AI, what is still human? Like, why do we even care? Like, what's left for us to do? That's actually what AI Arena is as a representation of what the future could look like. So let me start by explaining what AI Arena is. In AI Arena, you're playing a game. It's like a platform fighting game. It's kind of like Super Smash Bros. And the objective is for you to knock your opponent off of the stage so that you can register a kill. What you do in AI Arena is you're actually teaching an AI how to play the game the way that you would play it. So in the abstract, what you're doing is you are downloading your skills into software so that the software is a high fidelity representation of who you are as a human being. So the analogy I like to give is in the scene in the Matrix where Neo gets hooked up and then he was able to download kung fu into his mind. In AI Arena is the reverse of that. Is Neo downloading what's in his head into a model so that the model can play this game like how Neo intends to play, right? So now why is this important? Because if there is still room for humans in a competitive gaming context, you have to solve this problem of preserving competitive integrity, right? How do you control for that when there is AI tools that are becoming easily accessible, way cheaper at cost, that even the average like 16-year-old can deploy into a context of a competitive game? This is a huge issue confronting the gaming, especially the esports business right now. You see every single day, you see another headline: cheating at the highest levels of competition. And why is this happening? It's because in the realm of software, you cannot control for the ability of someone to basically inject a vastly superior thing that's playing the game, which is AI, in the context of human competition. So the solution to that, and our thesis to that, is you actually have to weave AI into the fabric of play. So you actually allow AI models to intermediate human skill, if that makes sense. Now, the key thing here is you need a transfer process where it's a high fidelity replication of the human to preserve integrity, right? So that's the system that we built underneath AI Arena that powers that experience. So within AI Arena, the game, we actually take a lot of the cheating vectors out of it. It's very difficult to use AI to cheat AI Arena. And then what we can preserve is the competitive integrity of this AI is still very much human trained. So if you train an AI and I train an AI, we're highly confident that these AIs are a replication of our intentions. So we're very comfortable pitting these AIs to battle against each other and still have that be a reflection of human skill. Does that make sense? Like this is I'm speaking purely from the perspective of like preserving human competitive integrity in this future world where AI is going to be the dominant form factor. And that's one of the underlying theses of why we created AI Arena in this underlying infrastructure, because we see that this is a very important problem to solve, especially in the context of like competitive gaming going forward.
So what you're saying is because AI is inevitable and it's very clear from the examples that I also mentioned, DeepMind, Alpha Street, AlphaGo, Start, AlphaGo, that AI will eventually win all the games against humans. Then let's integrate AI with humans so that humans can interact with AIs and develop their AIs, and then it becomes like a thing together, like we are seeing actually in other industries. For example, in medical industries, people were saying, oh, AI models which detects cancer and radiology will make doctors obsolete, but now we are seeing actually they are coexisting and they are helping each other, and things are going faster in terms of research, and also in terms of results we are getting better results. So you're saying let's actually have humans develop these AIs. One question related to that is, so now each gamer, if I understand well, has to develop their model so that they can actually improve. So as a result of that, you have a let's say you have a good model and that performs well, then the end result is these AIs playing each other, right? So if I'm a gamer, my question is, where's the entertainment component? Because to me, gaming is mostly one important element of it is entertainment. And Now, from what you're describing, I mean, I really like it as a nerd, and as a data scientist, I really like it. But someone who is just in their, as you see in the people in the public transports, on their phone doing some games just to for entertainment, this is becoming nerdier and nerdier. You're training a model that then these AI games, they will play each other, and actually, ultimately, you don't even need to look at the game, right? So you just develop a model, and then you can just see the outcome of the game, and then see if you won or not won. So how do you see that entertainment component here, if we stretch this idea?
Yeah. So I would start by saying like AI Arena as a game loop, as a game concept, is obviously different than if you were to play something like Super Smash Bros. Or any kind of fighting game where you are the thing that's controlling a character and you're competing against someone else who's controlling the character directly. It's a different game experience. I think we get this a lot. A lot of people say like, well, why is this even fun? Right? Because I'm not actually in control of what's happening. And I think what we've proven over time is that it is fun. It is actually a different variation of fun. And we have the stats to prove it. Like the amount of time competitive players playing spend in this game is absolutely staggering. And especially like super competitive players, I'm talking like X esports players or even esports teams are currently kind of onboarding into AI arenas, starting to figure out how to actually play this game and train their AIs to perform well. The fun is how I describe this game is it's kind of a mixture between an action game and a strategy puzzle solving game. The action part is we actually preserve the aspect of you controlling the character. The way that the reason that you do that is the AI can only learn from you through your demonstrations. Okay, so the starting point is you still have to play the game in order for the AI to learn that information. So in the abstract, it's like teaching the child how to play football, right? If it's the first time for them on the pitch, you have to show them how to kick a ball, right? You say, this is how you kick, this is how you pass, this is how you dribble the ball, this is how you shoot on goal, right? It's all demonstration based. And the child is standing initially and watching, and then you say, hey, here you go, you try, right? So that part of it is built into the game loop. And then there's another part of it, which is a bit more of like sensitive, like managing how your AI is learning the information is more coaching driven. It's more like, okay, well, I showed you how to kick a ball, but you don't always kick a ball, obviously, right? Like, when you're playing defense, there's no sense in kicking a ball this way. So it's context driven. So in these contexts, I want you to learn this skill depending on these things. So all of that is built directly into the game loop. And then what you have is you are very immersed in the process of your AI learning these skills. And then you watch it put all of this together and actually compete, right? So at that part, the thing that we like to kind of highlight is like, I don't know if you have a pet or if you have a child or if you ever seen like Olympic athletes or like athletes compete, right? Like if you watch the Olympics swimming, they always like pan to like the audience section and there's like the mom and dad of the person who just won a gold medal and they're like just like ecstatic, right? Like you can imagine the type of high that they're experiencing relative to the athlete themselves. And you can't tell me that the parents are not having a good time. It's probably one of the pinnacle experiences of their lives. But they weren't even in the heat of the action. Why? Because they were embedded and so vested in the entire process, right? So in some ways, the experience is even more elevated for them, despite the fact that they don't have control. And in fact, it's actually more nerve wracking for them, precisely because they don't have control when it's happening. So this game, when you're getting to a level where your AI is like decent to very good, it is one of the most intense experiences for the players, and we constantly get this feedback because the players can't control what's happening. So they know their AI is going to implement what they taught them, but they don't know how good the AI is going to be relative to the other AIs that people train, right? So you can watch some of the live streams that we've done. The people that have trained their AIs for those 3 minutes, you're like, that is the most intense 3 minutes I've ever had in gaming. And I'm not even doing anything. And they're just like complete nervous wrecks. So it's a feature, it's not a bug. But I would say it's different. So you can't compare it to a traditional game experience because it's not. But different to us in this case is it's exciting and it's incredibly fun, and it's also highly, I don't want to use the word addictive because it has other connotations, but it is like people like they you can see how much time they're spending in the game, and it's incredible, absolutely incredible.
Do you have some stats about your users and if they are more pure gamers or if they are nerds, engineers, data scientists?
I think there's a little bit of both. I would actually say the best players are still pure gamers. And the reason why is because gamers, like the upper echelon of gamers, they're just problem solvers. They have very good intuition about how to dissect and decompose a game loop, and then being able to attack different parts of the process so they get progressively better. That's the core skill set. So any type of game context is just another version of the same process. So if you get the best of the best in there, they're going to be able to figure that out quicker than the average player. I think a researcher could come to the table, and whilst they understand the theory, there's a practical implementation aspect of it where I don't think they can ever catch up to the best players. It's just and the empirics prove that out because the top players are still the top gamer. Like a lot of them are ex esports pros. Some of them are just they're like gaming. They just play so many different types of games, right? And so they pick up game logic and loops very quickly. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's like what we know for a fact is that AI Arena is it the target market is competitive hardcore players because this game is incredibly deep. It there's almost infinite permutations of what you're able to create with your AI because these are not deterministic models, these are probabilistic learning models, which means that everything is a fine grained spectrum of potential outcomes, right? No two AI is ever going to be the same. There's no skill ceiling. It's kind of like humans in real life. If you ever train for a combat sport, you know that there's no such thing as like a level 100 or something like it doesn't exist. You get into a ring and you see how good you are relative to another person who's relatively on your level, right? It's the same thing in AI Arena. Now we reveal that through like an ELO scoring methodology, right? Which is a function of your track record relative to people's rankings that they've accumulated as a function of their track record. So as your ELO is going up, we match you against more and more difficult AIs to face off against. So this way, the entire experience is calibrated for your relative skill set.
So how does it work in terms of the marketplace? So you have on one side the researchers, on the other side the gamers, and then my understanding is that the researchers try to develop the best models. By the way, these gamers can also be researchers, and then there is a marketplace where you can sell your model, and then but I mean, if you have a good model, why would you sell it if you can just let it play and it will earn you money, right? So first of all, how what is the distinction between a gamer and researcher if you're not actually playing the game but you're just developing a model that will play the game for you?
Yep.
Second, how do you make money other than winning a game, and what's the economy of the token behind it?
Yeah. So this gets into like the rabbit hole of the entire econ design. But let me address the question that you had, which is this concept of I think this is in the early documentations that we had, which is like the researcher competition and the gaming competition. So basically, the researcher competition is what I described under Psi. So think about it as like a competition specifically for AI sophisticated people who know how to program and develop AI models. The game competition is different. Is specifically targeting the normal player, like the normal gamer. They don't need to know any code because it's all gaming interface, right? It's just a game loop through an UI. Now, what? Okay, let me take a step back and use an analogy to illustrate what the difference is. Imagine Formula One, okay? You know the racing league. What Formula One is actually the composition of two things. It's building a car and then having a driver drive the car, right? And they're actually like separate and distinct. It's two different competitions. That's why there's a constructors cup and there's actually the racing cup, right? So so building the car is basically kind of like what's happening in the researcher competition. In the researcher competition, what's happening is you are building a car and then also racing it. Okay. In the gaming competition, we give everyone a car, right? You're not building a car. It's just, right now it's actually all the same car. Everyone's driving the same car. But what we want to see is, as a human, who can maximize the performance of the exact same car, right? That's the fundamental difference. But on the researcher side, it's different. You're building a car, so all the cars are different, and you're training the car, and all of that is actually the same process because it's just development. It's just like software. You know, um, so now what happens over time? Theoretically, what we can do is this: we can actually, when a researcher develops a new car, let's call it, we can actually allow them to just sell the car into the gaming competition. Only the car itself. The driver still needs to maximize the car. So in machine learning terms, it's the learning model that's being sold into the gaming competition. But the learning model hasn't been trained yet. It's all just potential. There still needs to be a human player to maximize that particular model and its performance in the game. Does that make sense? It's like if you sell a car to a driver, but you just leave it there, it doesn't do anything. The driver still needs to get in, race it on the car on the track in order to get the actual performance, right? So that's the distinction between the two. Now, since that time of what we originally wrote around the econ setup, there's been a lot more expansion of like the overall economic loop. Um, and currently, where we are is in the gaming competition. Again, going back to this metaphor, everyone's just starting off with the same car, and what we want to see in the gaming competition is who's the best driver, or in our case, who's the best trainer of AIs, right? And again, it preserves the competitive integrity. Everyone's starting on the same footing. Now, how do you monetize? The way that we use blockchain is only the most competitive players play in the blockchain version because they're the only ones who get to earn. So it's almost like a sports league type of construct where the blockchain version of the game is the pro tier. It's the professionals. Only these guys get to earn money. Everyone else, you get to play yeah, you have to get to a certain level. No, so the way that we do it is there's these NFTs which are basically it gates your ability to access the blockchain version of the game. So initially, people who helped us build the game and build community, they competed for these NFTs. So we just gave these NFTs away to these players. Over time, now that all of them have been issued, so we're not making as many of them anymore. People will have to go on the secondary market to buy them in order to get access to the pro level of competition. And as the economy materializes, what ends up happening is obviously you get capitalists coming in who own assets, and then they'll employ a group of people who are very good at the game to use the assets to compete, and then there's like profit share mechanisms in between, etc. So, but what we make sure to ring fence is that the on-chain version of the game is the competitive version, and what it means is that the inflation in the supply of our token only happens at that level, right? So it's constrained to the number of people and the number of NFTs that we issue. And we've only issued 420. So the inflation side of the economy is actually very well managed in our case. So circling back to this whole, did we learn anything from the Axie experience? I think we have. I don't know about everyone else. But the inflation side over time is constrained because we hardwired the fact that there's only 420 of these things. So we can manage inflation very, very carefully. And then on the demand side, this is where the monetization of the broader ecosystem kicks in. And to us, the monetization is really through fandom. So building these fan star relationships, right, and having people more be spectators and watching how other people's AIs perform, etc., and then creating things like fantasy sports experience on top of that is where we'll monetize the large share of the audience. That creates the balance in the economy because inflation is capped effectively and manageable, and then demand is socialized across a larger base, right? So you would imagine you're making money on hopefully thousands upon thousands of people, and you're only issuing rewards to 420 or 400 to 500 assets on the other side. This is how you keep kind of balance within a system over time.
That's very different, interesting mechanisms here, and novel. I should say novel designs in terms of GameFi. Let me ask you a more technical questions as a data scientist. So the training, if you want to train, there is so many things going on. You have to train every single move, defense, attack, jumping, kicking, left to right, right to left. So all these things are computationally expensive, and then you have to store these models somewhere. And so there is a lot of like compute, like GPU. There is a lot of storage, and so who is paying for all of that? Where is it coming from? Because if you want to use like Azure or AWS, you have to pay like a lot of money. And so where is yeah, who is paying for that?
Yeah, so the way that our infrastructure is built is that the compute and the storage of these models and characters is actually done at the user level, so it's on client side. And the reason why that's possible is because we've spent a lot of time developing a very lightweight neural network that is powerful enough to express itself in a variety of different ways. So it's like it's good enough for this variation that's needed for the competitive aspect of the game, but it's super lightweight, and it doesn't require much compute. So even the average computer desktop can run it, no problem. And the game itself runs on browser. Um, and then in addition, the other thing to remember here is there's no such thing as a data advantage in our game. So it's not that someone with more data is able to extract an advantage in the game, because the data is real time, right? Every single session, you're recreating a new batch of data to train your model, and then you discard that data, and then you do another batch, right? So it's not like you're accumulating terabytes of data just to feed into your model. But what that required is we had to solve problems with model design, because you have this issue of this is called like live online learning, right? So it's like traditional models is literally just like harvesting massive amounts of data. You train it on that data, and it learns a kind of a set of parameters in terms of behavior. In this case, it's like you have to iteratively, your model has to be flexible enough to iteratively learn new information whilst not forgetting old information. That's actually very hard to do. That's proprietary technology that we built. It's this very famous problem in machine learning is called catastrophic forgetting. And this is something that we spent a lot of time developing a novel solution to that, such that these characters can simultaneously learn new information whilst not forgetting old information, right? And for the human player, you can actually calibrate how much they retain new information relative to old information. So it becomes something that the player can manage. So for all these reasons, AI Arena is not reliant on large data sets, compute, or anything as an advantage. It can run on most computers, and we can basically push all of that client side and not have to, accumulate massive amounts of infrastructure bills, yeah, on the server side.
You emphasize a lot on education aspect. What is this education? Is it education of people or gamers to AI and how it works and the training, mechanisms? I think AI education in itself is a big sector that will disrupt schools, universities, because
Yes,
they can adapt to the specific needs of a specific person, to this weakness and strength, and their patients. So in its own, AI education is a big sector. But what you as AI Arena mean by education?
for sure. So it's a very good question because there is the distinction in terms of where we play. There is, I think, AI education as a theme is largely where it is today. Is how do we use AI in the education process to make learning more effective, faster, all these things. That's not necessarily what we're doing. What we're doing is how do we educate people about what AI is? That's the problem we're solving. So when you play AI Arena, what's actually happening is you are basically doing the exact same thing that an AI researcher or a developer is doing, except it's made into a game. But it's the exact same process, right? So as you're playing this game, as you're getting better at the game, you are effectively what you're doing. You're mastering the intuition of what AI is. And the better you get at this game, the better you start to understand how to manipulate or change or calibrate AI models to be more performant on a particular objective that you have. That's what AI Arena is as a game. So as a teaching tool, is teaching people intuition about what AI actually is, how AI works, which we think is a huge gap right now because most consumer products are actually abstracting all of that complexity away and saying, here's just a very superficial front end user interface. Don't worry about anything that's happening in the back. You put in some letters and it spits out things that are very cogent and it's like a magical box. And you're way better because of it. And I think that's like incredibly useful. It's not like there's nothing wrong with LLMs and things like ChatGPT, but we also believe that there's just not enough people on this planet that understands AI and can actually build things and make AI systems better. Why is that a problem? It's because AI is the most powerful technological tool that we have in our time. And we need more human capital that actually understands this stuff. And if you look at just how dire the supply demand imbalance is in this talent market, AI engineers are getting paid seven figures for a very average AI engineer. That's the market telling you that there's a severe supply demand imbalance in that market, right? So what AI Arena is what we're hoping to do is we're bringing more young people into the funnel where they can discover AI and understand it through a progression system that they're familiar with, through a motivation apparatus that keeps them, in it and wanting to explore more, such that they may start on the gaming side, but then ultimately they end up on the other side, the researcher platform, because this was like a gateway for them to explore how this AI works, etc. So we hope this is like a platform where there's this like natural flywheel effect of piping in talent through this gateway of a game and for them to migrate and become more sophisticated and actually spend time in applied AI and going down the path of things that are a bit more kind of sophisticated, all with the hopes that we're just building more human capital that are AI literate and sophisticated because we desperately need more people in the world to do this. And I think if we're successful in doing that, then Psi standalone alongside AI Arena, like this is probably one of the most valuable human capital platforms on the planet, right? Because that's the whole concept of Psi is like we're attracting the best of the best to compete, to allocate their time to solving really challenging problems. They're game like, so it's fun. It keeps them motivated and involved. There's a competitive aspect of it. But over time, yeah, it may just seems like a bunch of people like competing with AIs on a game. No, it's aggregating the highest value human capital on the planet in one place. That's the goal.
I think that's amazing, and it's really, as you mentioned, there is a big problem where every day, more and more people are using AI tools, which look very simple because it's a simple, ChatGPT is a very simple UI, but these are getting extremely complicated. And so,
Yeah.
if you did machine learning like 10 years ago, like the landscape of machine learning has changed so much since even in the last 5 years. So you know you start with logistic regression, and then you do like some other models like KNN, etc. And then we were talking about deep learning, and then we were talking about transformers, and then now you're talking about LLMs, and the complexity is huge. And everybody is using these tools, but nobody understands how they work. And this is just gonna the gap between the knowledge of people using AI and them understanding a little bit how it works is just going to increase. And I think I really see value here in the educational aspect that you guys are doing. Let me ask you one last question before concluding. I checked a bit on your documentation and some of your videos and what actually people can do and how they can train your models. So there are a number of parameters that they can play with, like a number of epochs, and the learning rate and all this kind of stuff. My question is, how different ultimately are the outcome of these models? Because if you look at Kaggle competition, if you're familiar with Kaggle, you have a specific problem, you have a data set, and then you need to come up with the best AI model or machine learning model. Usually the best models is not just just a little change in the parameters. Usually is a novel idea or a different architecture. But here it seems to me everybody has the same architecture as a deep learning model, and then you can just adjust the learning rate, etc. So I wonder how different ultimately these models can be from one each other if you look at the games.
Yeah. They're extremely different. It's the answer. Extremely different. Because I think because there's multiple components to the game loop, right? It's actually the interaction between creating the right data for your AI to learn from and then hyperparameter tuning. And each iteration is the interaction between the two. So let's just isolate for the fact that you and I both use the exact same data collection. We're somehow able to show our AI the exact same moves in the exact same sequence in the exact same amount of time. Then we get into the hyperparameter tuning aspect of it. And depending on how we toggle those settings, our AI is going to learn different things and it's going to sensitize differently, right? So its behavior is not even slightly different. It could be dramatically different, right? So the short answer is it's very very different. It's extremely flexible, and to the point where like you can't like if you want to train like we joke around and say if you want to train the worst AI you can. If you want to be like I want my AI to die in the shortest amount of time possible and that was my effort, like you can do it. There's no guardrails around this that says you can't do that, but that's an illustration of just how far this game goes and why we believe it's an infinite game because you can't it's almost statistically impossible to replicate two AIs that behave exactly the same. And I think even if you tried you couldn't do it. So I think that's the beautiful part of the game, but it's also where the skill component exists, right? What is the skill in AI Arena? The skill is actually this. Let's assume you have a basic skill set of playing platform fighting games. The real skill vector is what can you create in terms of strategies in your mind and how effectively can you implement that into your AI, right? The best players have closed that gap. The best players are the ones that are creative and understand how to theory craft strategies around what I want my AI to do, and then they can achieve it. Right? So there are some players that very good at the strategy, but they can't achieve it. So it means that you can't be that good at the game. It's the best players have to be able to do both. Not only can they craft the best strategies, but they can also get their AIs to behave exactly how they want them to behave in all of these different scenarios and situations, right? So that you have this policy that is well balanced and they're able to like deal with so many different types of fighters Because you have to remember, it's like you're competing against the world. You're training your AI one way. I'm training a completely different way. Sometimes you've never met my AI. You don't know how my AI is going to perform. So you have to train an AI that's able to deal with almost all potential outcomes, right? That like it's such a deep game. It's never going to end. It's just new people come and play, they discover new things, and then everyone else has to adjust because this person has a brief advantage, and it's just like the competition keeps ebbing and flowing and morphing in terms of the meta.
That's so interesting, and I have so many questions about the game mechanics and the game theory behind it, and how players adjust to each other. But probably we might do a second session at some point. But let's conclude. We like to conclude with some hot takes. I have two questions for you. The first is we said since 2021 there have been a lot of developments in GameFi, and we have still the old games like Axie Infinity. They have players, etc. We have new games like Pixels. What do you think will be the Axie Infinity of this upcoming bull market? Either the game or which of the subsectors of the GameFi, like AI games, etc.
Oh, that's so hard to just pick one. I think there's so many promising titles in terms of, if I were to interpret your question from what game will have like very dramatic commercial success, I think there's so many good candidates out there. I mean, right now, you look at Parallel, they're kind of playing a leadership role in the space. You have games like Wild Card coming out, which is kind of like a crossover of multiple different genres. You have, teams like Oh Baby Games developing, a suite of different experiences across many different game types. So I think you have many viable candidates out there for like a breakthrough commercial success and very like tenured teams that can lead them there. Um, Self-servingly, I'm going to say that AI Arena, yeah, and this is not like a shill of the project. And I think people need to interpret AI Arena very differently relative to the rest of the gaming market because there's nothing that came before it like us. But the one thing that I think AI Arena has the potential to replicate what Axie did, and it's still to this day, in my opinion, Axie was the only gaming project that had a transcendent impact on society. Its success wasn't because it was a game. Its success was because it became a social phenomenon, right? And no other gaming project has been able to replicate that. Even if you argue it was just a brief moment in time, it doesn't matter. Axie became a global social phenomenon at its peak. And AI Arena, I think, is not to say that we have all the conditioned precedents that could allow us to become a social phenomenon for the reasons of what inherently this game is about, right? And I think on the education aspects of it alone, we are exploring kind of the academia side, like working with universities, high schools, and activating student bodies around this. There's enormous applications in that domain. So when this thing spreads, I think it is one of the few projects in all of crypto that could have that social impact that Axie did in the last cycle. Um, and quite frankly, like most games just won't because it's just another game. Like it's not anything different than what already exists in traditional Web two. So I think that's my answer. And I fundamentally believe that, and I stand by it. It's just a different beast altogether. Yeah.
Let's conclude with a more philosophical question following up on what you said. Impact on society. In 21, with the Axie Infinity, we saw actually some real changes in some, I would say, low income countries where people could make more money playing Axie than doing their full-time job. And we saw a lot of these patterns and articles about that in some of the countries, where the average salary of a person, if it's like $300 $400, you could easily in 21 make those numbers playing Axie, or then later step in. And these impact the society. Now we had a short period where it worked, but then ultimately where we are going with the development of all the developments that we discussed, do you think that we're going to have this again? And ultimately this gonna change the global economy if this happens, because a lot of the global economy is relying, all these on these imbalances between high income countries, low income countries, where you have in the low income countries some factories with some maybe cheaper labor. But if this cheap labor now has some alternatives of just playing games and making similar amount of money, what's your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, so my view is that, and this speaks to the balancing of the economy question earlier. I do not believe there is a version of the world where games can provide income on a sustainable level across time to a large swathe of the global population. Because what you're talking about is universal basic income. And for that to happen, you still need the productivity side on the other side of it to finance for that expense effectively that you're distributing to the masses. So, but in crypto, what you have is a system where anyone can create their own version, unit of value, right? So initially, when you bootstrap, so long as there's some confidence behind what you're doing, that thing is going to have value for a brief moment in time, right? But as we saw with all these economies, you can't inflate in perpetuity; it'll collapse. It's just value. It is currency depreciation and devaluation. So I don't believe in a version of the world where gaming becomes that underlying UBI layer for the world, right? And the other thing is, if you are going to do that, what you'll see is it basically trends to the lowest marginal lowest marginal value of labor, right? So, i.e., the most competitive are the people whose income is the lowest around the world, and that's where because the opportunity of cost of time is the lowest, and that's where it would basically, the economics will clear at that price level. From our perspective, that's not the objective. From our perspective is we use competition as a mediating force in all of this, where everything has to be channeled through competition. So what we believe in is more a version that we like to call meritocracy, right? Meritocracy is very different than UBI, right? UBI is like everyone's just equal. Right? If you are, then you should get something. Meritocracy is not that. What meritocracy is there's an assumption that everyone has a equal starting point, but everyone can end up in different places. And where you end up is a function of skill, effort, creativity, right? Which is productivity at the end of the day. The outcome of that is productivity. So we always say equal opportunity, but unequal outcomes. That's the system that we want to live in. And I think it's fair because everyone had a similar kind of starting point. But ultimately, where you end up is dependent on you and how far you want to take it. Your effort is not just a function of time; it's a function of skill, employing technology, creativity, ingenuity, all of those things. And that's what AI Arena is. If you think about these assets, an uninitialized AI model is the same no matter who has it. But where these AI models end up is purely dependent on the person that's using it and training it, right? So everyone starts at the same level. Where you end up is vastly different. And then the market value of your AI is going to reflect that. Because if your AI is just better than everyone else, it's going to have a higher market value, right? Someone it's economically rational to pay a higher value for that asset because it has greater earning and cash flow generating potential. So that's the type of system that we're building. That's kind of the philosophy that we have. We think over the long term, by design, it is going to be sustainable. The only thing is execution risk along the way to building the system so that it scales to that level. But the design aspect of it, we're highly confident is sustainable.
Amazing. Thanks a lot for all these insights. That was a really insightful conversation, and wish you all the best for the game.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. This is a really fun conversation.